I never imagined pitching a tent on land I owned would end with 12 people behind federal bars. This is how it started. It was 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, and I was dead asleep in my tent when blinding flashlights detonated across my face. "Sir, step out and show some ID." We receive a report of suspicious activity. I lay there zipped inside my sleeping bag, on property my family has owned since 1952, completely disoriented. Apparently, some woman spotted my tent and dialed 911, convinced a dangerous drifter was squatting by the lake. What she didn't realize was that this land had been in my family long before there was ever neighborhood here, long before an HOA existed, long before she ever showed up in this community. But she wasn't backing off. Even after the deputies apologized and left, embarrassed out of their minds, she kept escalating, kept threatening, kept turning my life into a nightmare. She had no clue who she decided to mess with, and she definitely didn't know what I was about to uncover about her and her tight-knit circle of corruption. What would you do if someone harassed you on land you legally owned? Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, because what happened next changed everything. But let me rewind and explain how I walked straight into this mess. 6 months earlier, I was Marcus Thompson, just another veteran struggling to find footing in civilian life after 20 years as an Army Corps engineer. Then my grandfather passed away and left me his cabin. This wasn't some polished lakefront mansion. It was a rough-hewn log cabin he built himself in 1952, sitting on 5 untouched acres. The second I opened that warped wooden door, the scent of cedar logs mixed with lake water hit me like a memory. I was home. My grandfather was a local legend. He'd been a fishing guide for 40 years and taught half the county how to read water and tie flies. Every 4th of July, he hosted legendary fish fries, feeding anyone who showed up hungry. The whole shoreline filled with people, and you could smell wood smoke and fried base from miles away. But more than anything, he never backed down from bullies. In the 80s, some developer tried to buy out the lakefront families to build condos. My grandfather rallied the neighbors and ran those suits off with their tails tucked. "Marcus," he used to say, gripping my shoulder with those callous hands, "some fights choose you. And when they do, you finish them." I spent my first week just absorbing everything. The sound of loons echoing across the water at dawn. The crunch of pine needles under my boots as I walked the property line. The rough texture of those hand-cut logs brought back memories of helping him with repairs every summer. That's when I noticed something off. Fresh survey stakes that didn't match my grandfather's original boundary markers. Turns out an entire development had sprung up since my last visit 15 years earlier. Lakeshore estates. Oversized McMansions jammed onto tiny lots, with HOA fees high enough to buy a used car. But my land sat on a narrow peninsula, completely separate from their cookie-cutter suburb, like a pocket of authenticity surrounded by suburban uniformity. That's when I met the queen bee herself. Imagine the most entitled person you've ever met. Now put her in a white Lexus SUV and hand her a clipboard. Priscilla Whitmore rolled into my driveway like she owned it, stepped out in a spotless white outfit, right down to the shoes, and introduced herself as the HOA president. "I'm here to discuss bringing your property into compliance with our standards," she said, staring at my grandfather's cabin like it was a condemned eyesore. I nearly choked on my coffee. My property isn't part of your HOA. Never has been." Her plastic smile twitched. "Mr. Thompson, all lakefront properties fall under our covenants. It's about preserving property values and community aesthetics." The way she emphasized aesthetics while judging my family's legacy told me everything. This city transplant had decided the entire lake needed to fit her vision of suburban perfection. My grandfather's rustic cabin clearly didn't qualify. That night, I pitched my old army tent down by the beach. I figured I'd honor my grandfather by sleeping under the stars, the way he taught me. The feel of pine needles beneath my sleeping bag brought back memories of learning to fish these waters. His calm voice explaining how to read ripples on the surface. It should have been peaceful. Instead, I got flashlights in my face at 2 a.m. But here's where it gets interesting. After the deputies left, still embarrassed, Priscilla showed up bright and early the next morning, clipboard in hand, attitude set to maximum. "Mr. Thompson, camping without permits violates multiple community ordinances. You will be receiving formal violation notices." I stood there on my own land while she threatened me with rules she'd invented, and something snapped into focus. This wasn't about permits or standards. This was about control, about erasing everything my grandfather had built, and Priscilla Whitmore had just chosen the wrong veteran to push. 3 days later, a certified letter showed up in my mailbox that made my blood boil. Official HOA letterhead, Polish legal language, a demand that I attend an emergency community meeting to address my flagrant violations of established standards. The meeting was Thursday night at their sterile community center. I walked in wearing work boots and jeans, curious what kind of spectacle Priscilla had prepared. The smell of industrial carpet cleaner and burnt coffee hit me immediately. About 15 uneasy neighbors sat inside. What really caught my eye was a man in an ill-fitting suit standing beside Priscilla like official backup. "Before we begin," she announced theatrically, "I'd like you to meet my husband, Robert Whitmore. He works for the county zoning office and has graciously agreed to provide guidance on enforcement matters." My military training kicked in instantly. I remembered ethics briefings about conflicts of interest, public officials abusing their position for private gain, textbook corruption. But I stayed quiet and watched. Priscilla launched into a PowerPoint like she was presenting quarterly profits. That's when things turned strange. Every slide showed photos of my property. My dock, my cabin, my beach, my driveway. She'd been surveilling me for weeks like I was some kind of threat. "As you can clearly see," she said, clicking through images of my tent, "unauthorized temporary structures create liability issues and severely damage community aesthetics." The neighbors shifted uncomfortably. The tension was thick enough to cut. Everyone knew this was wrong, but no one wanted to be first to object. Then came the hammer. Mr. Thompson must sign this retroactive compliance agreement, including $2,000 in back fees plus monthly dues going forward. Her husband stepped in with his official tone. "The county fully supports HOA enforcement initiatives. We have extensive tools for dealing with uncooperative owners." That was enough. I stood, walked to the front, and laid my survey map and property deed across that table. Paper rustled in the silence. "Before anyone signs anything," I said loudly, "let's establish a few legal facts." I traced the boundaries with my finger. "My family's land ends here. Your HOA starts way over there. This property predates your development by 40 years and has never been under your authority." The room went dead quiet except for the buzzing fluorescent lights. I held up my grandfather's deed. "Continuous ownership since 1952. Your HOA was incorporated in 1995. You cannot retroactively claim control over land you never owned." Priscilla's face flushed crimson. Community standards supersede individual claims when property values are at risk. Her husband tried to sound authoritative, but I turned to the neighbors. "How many of you knew your HOA president has been collecting fees for property she has zero legal authority over?" Then I dropped the real bomb. "I'd be curious what other creative charges you've been paying that wouldn't survive legal review." That's when everything broke loose. Whispers spread fast. Neighbors comparing notes on mysterious assessments and unexplained fee hikes. Dorothy, an elderly woman in the third row, raised her hand. "We paid $1,500 for lake maintenance last year. I walk that shoreline every day. Nothing's changed." More hands shot up. Questions about project that never happened. Fees for services no one could explain. The room grew restless as Priscilla lost control. "This meeting is about Mr. Thompson's violations," she snapped, "not baseless complaints about HOA management." I gathered my papers calmly. "Actually, this meeting just became educational. If Mrs. Whitmore is claiming authority she doesn't legally have, every decision she's made deserves scrutiny." The room erupted as neighbors finally compared experiences they'd endured alone. Priscilla stormed out, her husband hustling behind her like a frightened child. Dorothy approached me afterward, eyes sharp despite her age. "Your grandfather warned us about people like her years ago. Said outsiders would keep trying to control what wasn't theirs." Driving home, gravel crunching beneath my tires, it hit me. Priscilla had made a fatal mistake. She turned a minor property dispute into a public audit of her entire operation. This wasn't about camping anymore. It was about power, money, and corruption, and she just handed me the keys to tearing it all down. Her retaliation came fast and ugly. Monday morning, 7 a.m. sharp, a county code enforcement truck rolled into my driveway like an invading tank. The inspector was pale and sweating, avoiding eye contact. He shoved an official notice at me, citing anonymous complaints about my septic system, dock permits, and cabin wiring, everything that had been legally grandfathered for 70 years. "I'll need to see permits for all structures," he muttered, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cool air. 2. 30 days to comply or face severe penalties. The projected cost made my stomach drop. Nearly $10,000 to upgrade systems that had been functioning perfectly since Eisenhower was in office. But here's where things got interesting. This anxious mess of an inspector let something slip. "Mrs. Whitmore personally flagged this property for priority inspection," he said, then immediately looked like he wished he could vanish. Bingo! Now I understood exactly how this game was being played. From my overseas military deployments, I recognized a pattern instantly. Corrupt local officials weaponizing government authority to pressure anyone who refused to fall in line. The harassment escalated throughout the week with mechanical precision. Tuesday morning, the HOA landscaping crew accidentally dumped a massive pile of grass clippings across my pristine beach. The stench of decaying vegetation baking in the summer heat was nauseating. When I called to complain, they claimed it was a routine mistake and said it would be cleaned up when schedules allowed. Wednesday brought emergency maintenance at 6 a.m. leaf blowers and hedge trimmers positioned with surgical intent to funnel noise straight through my bedroom windows for 3 solid hours. When I confronted the crew, they just shrugged. Orders were orders. Nothing personal. Thursday delivered fish and wildlife officers responding to reports of illegal camping and hunting. They were visibly embarrassed once they realized how fake the complaints were, but someone was clearly following a structured harassment checklist. By Friday, even my mail delivery turned hostile. The postal worker admitted someone kept calling and access complaints about my mailbox, forcing them to hold my mail downtown. But Priscilla had badly misjudged who she was dealing with. My Corps of Engineers background taught me one critical lesson. When someone attacks your infrastructure, you study theirs and find the weak points. I started by requesting a full environmental impact assessment of the lake area. 20 years in environmental engineering meant I knew exactly what to request and how to do it by the book. That's when I struck gold. The record showed Lakeshore Estates had violated multiple federal wetland protection laws during construction. These weren't minor issues. These were serious violations, the kind that trigger EPA investigations and crushing fines. Back in the Army, I learned that document fraud usually leaves repeating patterns across violations. So I filed Freedom of Information Act requests for 5 years of county HOA correspondence. Public records don't get to stay hidden, no matter how badly people want them to. The email trail I uncovered was devastating. Message after message revealed coordination between Priscilla's husband and county officials, fast-tracking HOA requests while burying independent property owners in red tape. They were literally using taxpayer-funded government resources to target citizens who wouldn't join their private club. Dorothy invited me over for coffee and showed me the true scale of what was happening. Her weathered hands trembled as she poured tea and described the slow destruction of our community. "The Hendersons lived here 40 years, she said quietly. After 8 months of manufactured violations and legal harassment, they sold for half their home's value just to escape. She kept listing names. The Millers, the Johnsons, 3 other long-term families driven out through coordinated harassment campaigns. Each property sold below market value to buyers with suspicious ties to Lakeshore Estates. I documented everything with military precision. Every interaction, every inspection, every coincidence went straight into my evidence file. Pattern recognition had saved lives overseas. The same principles applied here. Dorothy connected me with other targeted families who'd been too afraid to speak up alone. Our informal coffee meetings revealed the full picture. Systematic ethnic and economic cleansing disguised as community improvement. The smoking gun came when I cross-referenced property sales with county violation reports. Every forced sale occurred within 6 months of sudden code violations that had been ignored for decades. Still, I couldn't rush it. Military operations succeed through patience, intelligence, and timing. If I moved too soon, they'd shred evidence and scatter like roaches when the lights flip on. I needed an A-type case that would collapse the entire corrupt network. 2 weeks later, Priscilla escalated to full-scale war. The certified letter in my mailbox made my hand shake. With rage, $15,000 in alleged unpaid HOA dues spanning 20 years, with a 10-day deadline before property liens would be filed. Attached was a photocopied document that made my blood run cold. An alleged HOA membership agreement from 1995 bearing my grandfather's signature. The problem? My grandfather died in 2019, and I handled all his records. He never signed anything related to the HOA. I knew that for a fact, but what really set off alarms was how wrong the document looked. In combat zones, forged paperwork could get people killed. We were trained to spot inconsistencies. This signature had mismatched ink tones, uneven pressure, and letter formations that didn't match my grandfather's handwriting. The paper was far too crisp for a 30-year-old document, and the ink had that chemical shine of a modern ballpoint. It still smelled faintly of fresh toner. Another dead giveaway this had been recently printed. Priscilla wasn't just harassing me anymore. She'd crossed into felony fraud. That same week, things spiraled completely out of control. She organized a community safety patrol. In reality, it was HOA loyalists stalking my property around the clock, snapping photos with telephoto lenses like I was running a drug operation. I found survey stakes incorrectly placed along my shoreline, clearly attempting to steal sections of my beach. When I confronted the crew, they nervously claimed they were following work orders but couldn't say who authorized surveys on my private land. Then came the smear campaign. Anonymous social media posts claiming my cabin was an environmental hazard and that I was a dangerous, unstable veteran suffering from PTSD. The posts spread through local Facebook groups, complete with photos of my property taken from the lake. But Priscilla's desperation was turning into my advantage. Every escalation produced more evidence. The forged document alone justified federal charges, but I wanted the entire network exposed. I hired a forensic accountant to tear through the HOA's public financials. What she uncovered made Enron look amateur. The reserve fund had been systematically drained through consulting fees paid to shell companies. One firm, Lakeshore Development Consulting, had received $80,000 for community planning services that existed only on paper. Tracing the registration led straight to Priscilla's brother-in-law in Florida. They weren't even trying to hide it, just assuming no one would connect the dots. Families were billed for special assessments that never happened. Emergency repairs that were never performed. Lake maintenance projects that existed only in Priscilla's imagination and on homeowners' bank statements. Dorothy organized a neighborhood meeting at her kitchen table, and 8 families showed up carrying boxes of records. The aroma of fresh coffee mixed with the mustiness of old paperwork as people spread out years of suspicious charges and fabricated violations. They charged us $2,000 for shoreline restoration, said Jim, a retired mechanic. I walk that beach every morning. Haven't seen a single improvement in 3 years. Sarah, a single mother, had been hit with emergency assessments for security upgrades that turned out to be Priscilla's personal alarm system installation. The pattern was undeniable. Systematic theft disguised as management. The brilliance was using county harassment to silence anyone who questioned it. I contacted investigative reporter Lisa Finley at the local paper. When I laid the financial analysis across her desk, she let out a low whistle. "This is front-page material," she said, scanning the shell company trail. "But I need multiple independent sources and airtight documentation before publishing." Meanwhile, Priscilla was unraveling. Emergency board meetings to expel disruptive residents. Surprise county inspections arranged by her husband. Wild rumors about my supposed commercial development plans. But desperation made her sloppy. The development lies were so absurd that even neutral neighbors started doubting her. People who'd known my grandfather for decades weren't buying the character assassination. I spent a month assembling an ironclad file: financial fraud, forged documents, government corruption, sworn witness statements. Everything was finally aligning. I had enough evidence to destroy the operation, but I needed one last piece. Recorded confessions, something denial couldn't escape. It was time to let Priscilla believe she was winning while I built the trap. The call came at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. My forensic accountant's voice shook with excitement and something close to fear. "Marcus, you need to get down here now." What I found. Jesus Christ, this is way bigger than we thought. I threw on clothes and drove to her downtown office, heart hammering the whole way. The smell of stale coffee and printer toner hit me as I stepped into her cramped workspace, documents covering every surface like. "3. Sit down," she said, face pale as chalk. This isn't HOA corruption. This is organized crime. She pointed to a timeline spanning the entire war. Names, dates, property transfers, dollar amounts, all connected with red string like a scene from conspiracy thriller. They've stolen over $2 million in the last 5 years alone, she whispered. 12 families. The exact same pattern repeated every single time. My blood ran cold as she walked me through the operation. Manufactured code violations to force families into selling their homes, purchased through shell companies at well below market value. Immediate rezoning approvals for high-density developments. Profit split between county officials and HOA leadership. The Henderson's cabin, sold for $200,000, rezoned, flipped to developers for $600,000 3 months later. The Miller's waterfront lot, $400,000 purchase, $700,000 resale. But it wasn't just the money, it was a human devastation that made my stomach turn. She had tracked down displaced families, and their stories were heartbreaking. Mrs. Henderson passed away in a nursing home 6 months after losing her retirement cabin, telling nurses she couldn't comprehend how strangers had stolen her husband's legacy. A young military family lived in their car for 2 weeks after being bankrupted by legal fees fighting fabricated violations. They targeted veterans, specifically, my accountant said, voice-breaking, elderly people, single mothers, anyone they thought wouldn't fight back effectively. That's when the full weight of it hit me like a freight train. My grandfather's property wasn't just valuable. It was a linchpin of their multi-million-dollar plan. 200 feet of pristine shoreline in the heart of what they planned to turn into a luxury lakefront resort. Without my land, their project couldn't move forward. I was the final obstacle to a criminal enterprise that had been destroying families for half a decade. The environmental plans were just as sickening. Clow-cut the mature forest my grandfather had protected. Fill in wetlands where he'd taught me to identify bird species. Build condos where we had camped under the stars. Everything he'd fought to preserve was at risk for profit. There's more, she whispered. Evidence they'd expanded operations into 3. Neighboring counties. Same players. Same methods. A regional conspiracy involving dozens of public officials. She showed me bank records with bribes to county inspectors, emails coordinating harassment campaigns, and environmental permits illegally fast-tracked through insider connections. The evidence was overwhelming. Federal racketeering, conspiracy, fraud, public corruption, environmental crimes. But I realized something terrifying. If they destroyed entire communities for money, what would they do to protect themselves once they knew I had uncovered everything? We can't go public yet. I said, military training taking over. They'll destroy evidence and vanish. We need federal coordination and a simultaneous takedown. The small office smelled of fear, sweat, and determination as I stared at the wall of evidence. Time to call in the cavalry and finish what my grandfather started. The call that changed everything came at 6 a.m. while I was making coffee. My old Army buddy Jake from the FBI sounded like he'd been fueled by espresso all night. Marcus, holy, what you sent me. This is a federal RICO case. Racketeering, conspiracy, public corruption. We've been hunting exactly this kind of rural corruption network. 2 days later, I sat in a sterile Atlanta federal building smelling of government coffee and anxiety, facing 3 FBI agents who looked like they'd stepped out of a recruiting poster. Special Agent Rodriguez spread my evidence across the conference table like a general planning an invasion. Mr. Thompson, she said, studying financial flowcharts, this represents one of the most comprehensive corruption schemes we've seen in rural areas. But we'll need 90 days to build an A-type case that will hold in federal court. 90 days of appearing defeated while secretly coordinating the takedown of criminals who had destroyed my community. My hand shook as I signed the federal cooperation agreement. The plan required military-level precision, FBI financial crimes, state environmental protection, county sheriff, IRS criminal investigation, all moving simultaneously so the conspirators couldn't destroy evidence or flee. Rodriguez explained wire recording protocols with the gravity of a combat mission. Recorded confessions admitting conspiracy would be critical. Back home, I began the hardest role of my life, playing the broken veteran ready to surrender. I let word spread through Dorothy that legal costs were crushing me, that I might pay Priscilla's extortion just to make it stop. The real work happened in Dorothy's kitchen, our unofficial resistance HQ. The smell of her chocolate chip cookies mingled with the mustiness of evidence boxes as displaced families shared horror stories with federal investigators. Mrs. Miller drove 3 hours from her tiny apartment to deliver documentation from when they stole her lakefront home. "I kept everything," she said, tears streaming. "I knew someday someone would need to see what they did to us." The environmental lawyer she'd contacted took the case pro bono after seeing the destruction plan for our lake. "This level of environmental crime typically triggers federal EPA intervention," she explained. "Combined with the FBI case, we could hit them with simultaneous civil and criminal penalties." I gave investigative reporter Lisa Finley exclusive access, with the agreement she wouldn't publish until federal authorities were ready. "This could be the biggest corruption expose our county has ever seen," she said, eyes bright at the evidence. "I'll sit on it until you give the signal." The psychological warfare was brutal. Every interaction with Priscilla required me to act increasingly desperate while secretly recording her incriminating statements. 20 years of military training helped, but pretending weakness when every instinct screamed, "Fight back," nearly broke me. Federal surveillance teams positioned unmarked vehicles around targeted locations. My rustic cabin became an unlikely safe house where traumatized families could meet investigators without fear. The contrast was surreal. Federal agents briefing witnesses at my grandfather's hand-built kitchen table. The technical preparation felt like gearing up for a covert mission. FBI provided recording equipment disguised as ordinary shirt buttons and pen clips. We rehearsed scenarios to elicit confessions without suspicion. One mistake could ruin months of work. Agent Rodriguez drilled me on evidence standards with military thoroughness. Everything had to be legally obtained and fully documented. Chain of custody was sacred. One procedural error could invalidate the entire case. I spent sleepless nights studying federal racketeering law, learning how prosecutors prove conspiracy across multiple jurisdictions. My evidence already showed interstate commerce violations, giving federal authorities clear jurisdiction over Priscilla's criminal enterprise. Community protection required delicate coordination. Dorothy organized legitimate Save Our Lake environmental meetings, providing cover for resistance activities. Federal authorities established emergency protocols in case the conspirators became violent when cornered. The hardest part? Watching continued harassment of vulnerable neighbors while unable to act directly. An elderly veteran received bogus violation notices. A single mother was hit with manufactured emergency assessments. Every day without action, someone else suffered, but military discipline held. Premature action would let the criminals escape justice and destroy evidence of their systematic community destruction. After 6 weeks, all pieces were in place. Federal agents ready for simultaneous arrests. Environmental enforcement prepared. Media coordination established. Witnesses protected and briefed. The trap was set. All I needed was one final meeting where the entire conspiracy would confess while celebrating what they thought was victory. Time to let Priscilla believe she'd finally broken me. Her final assault was pure savagery. Sensing blood, she abandoned all pretense and went straight for my throat. It began with sabotage that made my skin crawl. During a November storm, someone cut my dock anchor lines with surgical precision. I woke to splintering wood as my grandfather's hand-built dock smashed against the granite shoreline like broken bones. The cleanly severed ropes told the story. This wasn't storm damage. It was deliberate destruction. 2 days later, an emergency county inspection team descended on my property at dawn like a SWAT raid. They discovered urgent safety violations that had somehow been overlooked for 70 years. Septic, electrical, foundation issues requiring $15,000 in immediate repairs. But the psychological warfare was where they truly revealed themselves. Someone spray-painted veteran scum across my cabin walls in blood-red letters, making my hands shake with rage. My truck tires were slashed. Anonymous flyers circulated around town, labeling me a dangerous, unstable soldier threatening children. The smells of spray paint and burned rubber filled the air as I documented every attack, knowing hidden cameras and FBI surveillance captured everything for the final reckoning. 3 weeks into the nightmare, Priscilla made the fatal mistake I'd been praying for. She arranged a private dinner at Romano's, the upscale steakhouse where county officials conducted their dirty deals. Walking and wearing FBI recording gear felt like suiting up for the most important mission of my life. The air smelled of expensive cologne and privilege, with Priscilla waiting in a corner booth alongside a man in a suit that probably costs more than most people's cars. If you want, I can immediately rewrite part 4 next in the exact same style and word-preserving way, keeping the tension and storytelling flow intact. 4. Marcus, she purred with venomous sweetness. Meet David Finley, president of Lakeside Resort Development. Chen's handshake was cold as a corpse. We're here to offer you a reasonable exit from this unfortunate situation. 200,000 cash, Priscilla announced, as if bestowing a favor. Immediate closing, no inspections, no complications. My property was worth over $500,000, and they knew it. This wasn't business. This was extortion wrapped in a smile. That seemed significantly below market value, I said, playing the exhausted veteran ready to cave. Priscilla's mask cracked slightly. Marcus, let's discuss reality. County violations will bankrupt you. Legal fees are mounting daily. You're facing liens, foreclosure, and permanent community hostility. Chen leaned in with predatory confidence. We've successfully navigated similar challenges with 12 other lakefront properties. Families who chose cooperation over confrontation found the transition far less traumatic. Bingo! Recorded admission of systematic targeting. I let my voice shake slightly. I don't understand why this is happening. My family's been here since 1952. Priscilla's eyes lit up with triumph. Progress requires difficult decisions. Marcus. Individual nostalgia cannot obstruct community advancement. Lakeside Resort represents $40 million in regional investment, Finley added. High-end tourism. Permanent job creation. Substantial tax revenue. Your grandfather's primitive approach simply conflicts with modern economic realities. The arrogance was breathtaking. They bragged about destroying families while confessing to federal crimes on tape. How many other families have you helped relocate? I asked weakly. Enough to perfect our process, Priscilla smiled coldly. The Hendersons, Millers, Johnsons, they all discovered new opportunities better suited to their circumstances. Chen nodded. Resistance only increases costs and prolongs suffering for everyone involved. I begged for 48 hours to consider, playing the broken man, finally accepting defeat. They agreed immediately, practically salivating at their approaching victory. Driving home through the darkness, I felt my grandfather's spirit riding shotgun. The recording was devastating. Clear conspiracy admissions. Specific victim references. Detailed descriptions of their systematic harassment campaigns. Federal Agent Rodriguez nearly jumped out of her chair when I played the audio. This is prosecutor's gold, she said. Detailed conspiracy confessions with explicit victim targeting. They had just handed us a federal conviction. The final trap was scheduled for Thursday afternoon, a public signing ceremony at the county courthouse, with media present to document Priscilla's community improvement success. County officials, developer partners, HOA board members, the entire criminal network would gather to celebrate. What they didn't know, federal authorities would make simultaneous arrests the moment I dropped my act and reveal the true scope of their criminal enterprise. 7 decades after my grandfather first fought these battles, it was time to honor his memory with the most satisfying justice our community had ever witnessed. The reckoning was coming. The character assassination campaign launched the next morning like a coordinated military strike. Priscilla clearly believed psychological warfare would break me before I arrived to sign away my family's legacy. Anonymous flyers appeared on every car windshield overnight. Dangerous veteran threatened community safety, screamed the headline above a grainy photo taken with a telephoto lens. The text claimed I was a mentally unstable soldier with PTSD and violent tendencies, endangering children and property values. My phone rang at 6 a.m., neighbors calling, concerned for someone they'd known since childhood. Dorothy was furious. Marcus, this is disgusting. Everyone knows it's fabrication. But something beautiful happened. Instead of turning the community against me, Priscilla's lies triggered a backlash she never anticipated. The local veterans organization issued a public statement defending my character and military service. 3 neighbors who'd known my grandfather wrote letters to the editor condemning the attacks as shameful lies against a decorated soldier. The smear campaign backfired spectacularly, but Priscilla doubled down. False police reports flooded the system. Tuesday morning, cops at my door, responding to claims of threatening behavior at the school bus stop. Wednesday, allegations of brandishing weapons and terroristic threats. Thursday, reports of drug activity and suspicious nighttime behavior. Each time, officers were embarrassed and apologetic. So, we know this is harassment, but we have to respond to every call, Deputy Martinez said after the third bogus report. Someone's really got it out for you. Meanwhile, county officials worked overtime to expedite the harassment timeline. Robert Whitmore personally approved emergency environmental exemptions for the Lakeside Resort project. Permits that normally took months were rubber-stamped in days. I watched from my window as survey crews swarmed neighboring properties, measuring and marking boundaries for the massive development project. Diesel exhaust mixed with autumn leaves as they prepared to destroy everything my grandfather had protected. But the most revealing moment came when Priscilla lost all restraint. She organized a premature victory celebration at her house, inviting county officials, developer partners, and select HOA members to toast their community improvement success. The FBI surveillance team captured audio that was absolutely devastating. Priscilla, drunk on wine and power, bragged, "We successfully removed 12 non-compliant families over 5 years." The key: coordinated pressure, code violations, legal harassment, social isolation, until they break. County Inspector Williams laughed as he described his role. Mrs. Whitmore calls, "I find violations. Doesn't matter if they've been fined for decades. There's always something needing expensive updates." David Finley, the developer, was even more explicit. Lakeside Resort couldn't proceed without eliminating the original property owners. Sentimental attachment to primitive cabins doesn't serve modern economic interests. Here's where Priscilla made her biggest mistake. Robert Whitmore, emboldened by alcohol and anticipation of victory, detailed the government corruption that made their scheme possible. "County resources are supposed to serve community development," he slurred. "If property owners can't adapt to progress, enforcement tools exist to encourage cooperation." The recording captured systematic admission of bribery, conspiracy, fraud, and abuse of public office. Federal prosecutors would have a field day with evidence this comprehensive. 3 days before the planned signing ceremony, I received the final ultimatum. Priscilla personally delivered a certified letter demanding my presence at Thursday's property transfer at the county courthouse. "Marcus," she said, predatory satisfaction in her voice, "I hope you understand this is the best possible outcome for everyone. Resistance has only made the process more expensive and painful than necessary." I played my part perfectly, appearing defeated and financially broken. "I just want this nightmare to end," I said, letting my voice crack. Her smile was chilling. "Thursday afternoon, you'll sign the papers, accept the payment, and start your new life somewhere more suitable. The community will finally have the peace it deserves." As she drove away in her white Lexus, I felt the weight of 70 years of family history on my shoulders. Everything my grandfather had built, fought for, and protected was apparently going to be sold to criminals Thursday afternoon. What Priscilla didn't know, Thursday would mark the end of a criminal empire and the beginning of justice for every family she had destroyed. Federal agents were positioned. Media was coordinated. Evidence compiled. Arrest warrant signed. The trap was set. Thursday afternoon arrived with crisp November air and the kind of tension you feel before a thunderstorm. County courthouse steps buzzed as I walked up, carrying a manila folder that contained either surrender documents or the evidence to destroy a criminal empire. Priscilla stood near the entrance in her pristine white outfit, practically glowing with triumph. County officials milled around like it was a ribbon-cutting ceremony. David Finley had brought champagne bottles for the post-signing celebration. Local news cameras captured what they thought was a routine property transfer. What none of them knew: FBI agents were embedded throughout the crowd, disguised as reporters and courthouse staff. Federal marshals waited in unmarked vehicles. State environmental protection officers sealed the exits. "Marcus," Priscilla called out with theatrical warmth, "so wonderful you're here to finalize this beneficial arrangement for everyone involved." I approached the signing table they'd set up on the courthouse steps, complete with microphones and media attention. The smell of expensive cologne mixed with autumn leaves as the conspirators gathered for their moment of victory. Before we began, Priscilla announced to the cameras, "I want to thank the county officials who made this community improvement possible." 5. Robert Whitmore, David Finley, and our dedicated HOA board have worked tirelessly to enhance our neighborhood's character. Robert stepped forward with government authority. This property transfer represents exactly the kind of cooperative community development our office supports. Mr. Thompson has made the responsible decision to contribute to regional progress. I reached for the pen, then froze and looked directly into the news cameras. Actually, before I sign anything, I have something important to share with everyone here. I opened my folder and pulled out the comprehensive evidence file instead of signing papers. For the past 6 months, I've been documenting a criminal conspiracy that systematically stole property from families throughout this county. Priscilla's face went sheet white. Marcus, what are you talking about? I held up financial records for the cameras. This woman and her partners had operated a racketeering enterprise that destroyed 12 families over 5 years, stealing over $2 million through coordinated harassment, fraud, and government corruption. This is outrageous. Robert stammered, his voice shaking. I pulled out the recorded conversations. I have detailed confessions from every member of this conspiracy recorded over multiple meetings where they admitted to systematic targeting of veterans, elderly residents, and vulnerable families. David Finley began backing away from the cameras. I don't know what you're talking about, he said. Mr. Finley, I addressed him directly. 3 nights ago you told me that Lakeside Resort couldn't proceed without eliminating original property owners and that sentimental attachment to primitive cabins doesn't serve modern economic interests. I turned to the news cameras. These people have been using county government resources to manufacture code violations, forge legal documents, and terrorize families into selling their generational properties for pennies on the dollar. That's when Agent Rodriguez stepped forward, badge visible. FBI, Mr. Thompson has been cooperating with a federal investigation into racketeering and public corruption. The courthouse steps erupted in chaos. Federal agents were identifying themselves throughout the crowd. Robert Whitmore tried to run but was immediately handcuffed by marshals. David Finley was on his phone, probably calling lawyers, when agents confiscated his device. Priscilla was still trying to control the narrative. This is a mentally unstable veteran making wild accusations. I looked straight into the nearest camera. Mrs. Whitmore, you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, racketeering, and public corruption. Your own recorded words will convict you. The handcuffs clicking shut on Priscilla's wrists was the most satisfying sound I'd ever heard. Her perfect white outfit was rumpled, her makeup running, her empire crumbling in real time on live television. Dorothy and other neighbors had arrived as word spread throughout the community. Displaced families drove from 3 counties to witness the arrest of the people who had destroyed their lives. Mrs. Miller was crying as she watched Robert Whitmore being led away in handcuffs. They told me my septic system was failing, she said through tears. Cost me my home and my retirement savings. I addressed the growing crowd and media. This is what happens when ordinary citizens refuse to be intimidated by criminals hiding behind official authority. My grandfather taught me some fights choose you, and when they do, you finish what you started. News vans were arriving from regional stations as word spread about the massive corruption bust. Federal agents loaded evidence boxes while state environmental officers served cease-and-desist orders on the illegal development project. As Priscilla was led past me in handcuffs, she hissed, "You have no idea what you've done." I smiled and said the words I'd been saving for months. "Lady, I know exactly what I've done, that I've honored my grandfather's legacy and saved my community from criminals." The reckoning was complete. 6 months later, I'm sitting on my grandfather's restored dock, watching the sunrise paint the lake in shades of gold and crimson. The sound of loons calling across the water reminds me why this place is worth fighting for. The legal aftermath was swift and brutal for conspirators. Priscilla and Robert Whitmore pleaded guilty to federal racketeering charges rather than face a jury trial with overwhelming evidence. Priscilla received 8 years in federal prison plus full restitution to victims. Robert got 6 years and permanent disbarment from any government position. David Finley's Development Corporation paid $5 million in environmental fines, and their permits were permanently revoked. County Inspector Williams received 3 years for accepting bribes, and the entire county zoning office was placed under federal oversight for generating $8 million for affected families. Mrs. Miller bought back her original property and restored her retirement savings. The Henderson family heirs received compensation honoring their grandparents' stolen legacy. But the real victory was watching our community heal and rebuild. Dorothy organized the first annual Justice and Remembrance Festival on the one-year anniversary of the arrests. Families scattered by Priscilla's harassment returned to share stories and celebrate survival. The smell of barbecue smoke and the sound of children laughing filled the air where criminal meetings once took place. I established a Grandfather's Legacy Scholarship, using money recovered from the conspiracy. Every year, we provide full college funding for 3 local veterans pursuing degrees in environmental protection, civil engineering, or public service. The first recipients were children of families displaced by Priscilla's scheme who chose to return and rebuild. The Environmental Restoration Project became a model for lake conservation throughout the region. Federal funding removed all illegal construction materials, replanted native vegetation, and restored wetlands damaged during the development preparation. Water quality testing shows the lake ecosystem is healthier now than it has been in decades. The new Neighborhood Association operates with complete transparency and democratic governance. Monthly meetings are recorded and published online. Financial records are audited by independent accountants. No decisions are made without majority approval from affected property owners. Property values actually increased after the criminal network was eliminated. Families seeking authentic lakefront living were drawn to our community's proven ability to resist corruption and protect natural beauty. 3 new families purchased properties and committed to preserving the area's rustic character. The case became a national model for prosecuting rural corruption. FBI agents now use our evidence as training material for identifying similar schemes. State legislation was strengthened to prevent HOA overreach and protect property owners from harassment. Veterans advocacy groups cite our experience as proof that military training provides valuable skills for civilian community protection. On quiet evenings, I sometimes camp on the beach where this adventure began. The texture of pine needles under my sleeping bag brings back memories of learning to fish with my grandfather's patient guidance. I can almost hear his voice on the wind. You finished what we started, son. Dorothy, now in her 80s, is our unofficial community historian. She's writing a book about the corruption scheme and how ordinary people fought back against organized crime. Your grandfather would be so proud, she tells me regularly. You honored his memory by protecting what he loved most. The ripple effects continue. 3 neighboring counties launched their own HOA corruption investigations after our case made headlines. 2 additional criminal networks have been identified and prosecuted using techniques developed during our investigation. Dozens of families have recovered stolen property and received justice. Sometimes people ask if the stress and danger were worth it. I point them toward the children playing on our restored beach, the families who return to ancestral properties, and the pristine lake that will be protected for generations. Last month, I received a letter from a veteran in Oregon whose family were being targeted by a similar corruption scheme. He'd read about our case online and was using our evidence techniques to build his own federal investigation. The fight continues, but now people know they are not alone. Drop a comment below and share your own HOA nightmare stories. You're not powerless against corruption, and this community is here to support each other. Hit that subscribe button because more stories of ordinary people fighting extraordinary corruption are coming, and together we can make sure justice gets served wherever it's needed. Sometimes the smallest fights are the biggest consequences, and sometimes fighting for what's right is the most important thing you'll ever do. Thanks for hanging out on HOA Stories, where the HOA Karens meet their match. If this story had you cheering or cringing, go ahead and like the video, drop a comment with your reaction, and hit subscribe so you're ready for the next wild HOA tale.